Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and we are so happy that you can join us today for what's sure to be a very exciting discussion. Before we start, I'd like to let you know a little bit about STIG, Aspen Science and Technology in Government. We call it STIG. The mission of STIG is to assist interested public administrators in learning about the use and limitations of science and technology in government. STIG and its members are interested in a broad range of topics, from environmental science to information technology to science, policies and innovation, and everything in between. These are dynamic and exciting subject matters which government continues to grapple with, and the needs of researchers and practitioners are there to explore, to figure out how government can get better with it. You are always welcome to visit our website. It's SSTIG.info, and there's more information there. So let's get into our discussion. So this is our first brown bag discussion of 2023, and it's one that we've been really looking forward to. I will very briefly introduce our esteemed panelists because I'd rather use our time for discussion versus introductions, but feel free to Google any of them when you have time if you want more information on any. So my brief introductions, I'm going to start out with Santiago Garces. And Santi, he is the CIO of Boston, Massachusetts Department of Innovation and Technology. Then we have Dr. Derek Kruse. He's the CIO of Douglas County and the city of Omaha. Their abbreviation is .com. It's cute. Since 2012, and he brings with him over 20 years of experience as a CIO. And then we have Mike Sarasti, and he is the former CIO for the city of Miami with well over a decade of experience. In order to ensure a timely event, we're going to leave all questions towards the end of the presentation. So please use the chat feature. We'll be monitoring that and asking questions of the panelists from there. So first, I'd like to welcome our three CIOs. So welcome. We appreciate you being here. I just want to, I'm Georgette Dumont, and I am the chair of Aspen Science and Technology in Government, and I am the associate professor and MPA director at the University of North Florida. I would like to start this conversation with, it was punctuated equilibrium for the academics out there of technology adoption. So the pandemic. So you were all at your you were all CIOs at the time when the pandemic hit, and government really needed to jarringly shift focus. And so there are some positives and negatives about that. Can you tell us what you thought when the pandemic hit and how you were able to get your municipalities, your cities and county up and going to get ready for that drastic change in just daily operations? We'll start with Mike.
Sure. Hey, am I muted? No, I'm good. So I'll start with like my own personal mindset shift. I think a month before, Santi and I were in Barcelona having big ideas about smart cities at a conference over there, and started to hear word about what was coming. I think my former boss, Fernando, when he called me with a bit of an apology a month after the pandemic, he's like, hey man, all these things that you were asking for as a CIO, you're like, hey, I need, a little bit of your backing to help staff do this or staff do that. And I would always give staff the benefit of the doubt that, oh, there's a reason that we can't digitize a particular service. We have to do this thing in some old school in-person process. And he calls me and he's like, I'm really sorry. It's amazing what people are willing to do when death is knocking at your door. And things that people said that they absolutely could not do, and that they could not possibly do this digitally, were all of a sudden demanding to have it done by the next day. So the mindset shift, we think we spent a lot of time sort of doing cultural change. In this case, it just happens. And this is often how this kind of like exponential like leaps in some of the stuff that we do end up occurring. They just end up happening as a result of circumstance. Now, I will say that like the preparation that we put into a lot of these things over time really paid off. So I think it's a combination that mindset, shit that occurred in the pandemic. I think we were able to keep up for two reasons. We had we're pretty comfortable with change. So our whole move to become more agile as an organization let us like be in the stance to adapt quickly. That was super helpful. The fact that we spent a good number of years working on digital service work leading up to this made it all seem like magic when we turned things on within a couple days. So preparation is absolutely key. And then the rest is, the rest sort of just kind of happens to you, and you just got to be ready to adapt. So yeah, I'm really proud of the prep work, and I'm really proud of our ability to have an agile stance, because that was absolutely required when the pandemic hit.
Great. And Santi, do you want to follow up with that, since he mentioned you started it together?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, as Mike said, we were in Barcelona the week before the week or 2 weeks before the pandemic started in March, and we I think kind of starting by doubling down on what Mike said, I think that the pandemic was a moment in which almost like from a technology standpoint, the bill came due, in that everything that we had done to prepare paid off, and everything that we had done and deferred, we had to deal with the consequences of it. I was in Pittsburgh, and I remember getting a text message from the chief of staff and from the mayor telling us that a group of us were going to convene. I think at the time we didn't know about the variant, so this might not have aged as well, but he called it his Delta team. And we convened in the mayor's office, and we kind of created a plan around how we would continue operating the city. And in some sense, again, going around this like notion of preparation, like going in and looking at the COOP plans, the continuity of operations and business continuity plans, and try to see what frameworks were there. But in some sense, a lot of this was getting built on the fly. So, there's things that people wouldn't think that are critical to keep the city working. But the first thing that we were trying to think about was payroll and accounts payable. So how do you enable payroll clerks to make sure that people get paid? Because, all these essential workers might not continue to do the essential work if they're not getting paid for an extended period of time. So just thinking about like, how would they stay connected and whatnot. I think the pandemic for me, like, helped test some assumptions that we have in government around like how we deploy projects. Give you an example. Prior to the pandemic, I had thought about the modernization of the VoIP system that powered 311 in Pittsburgh. So like we got, forget, like 300,000 calls per year or something like that from residents calling about different issues. And the incumbent system was the Centrex, hardline phone system. And when the pandemic started, we were one concerned for the safety of our employees, because they're going to have to work literally in this like enclosed space all day long. So, we started working on reduced staffing so that there could be proper separation. But, it's still not ideal to have people come to the office. And because we had reduced staffing, we're starting to have an increase in the drop abandonment rate for calls and whatnot. So we went from deciding that we were going to modernize to a cloud-based VoIP system to implementation to actually commissioning the production system in a week. And I would have thought before that that was a project that was going to take 6 months, 9 months, like between like designing an RFP, going out for procurement, designing, testing, more testing, people complaining, people being concerned. And I think close by saying, I think the pandemic really showed us that technology is essential to the operations of any government, and that at a time of crisis, it can be life-saving. Like the ability of staying connected was the difference between you going to an office where you'd be at a higher risk of contracting COVID or being able to continue to do your job. And I think that now that the pandemic is kind of shifting to the next phase, as we think about digital equity and we start thinking about like all of the barriers that different groups of people face at maintaining connectivity, whether it's internet access or it's devices or it's the skill to use these things, it is a little bit sad to me and a little bit concerning because, you know, like we don't know what the next hazard is, like whether it's like hurricane, flooding, or something that's going to require massive amounts of people to be displaced. And technology can be such a great support, but only when we invest in it, only when we're like prepared to do it. And we're in a position where we can pivot quickly and start deploying resources to keep things going.
Thank you. Derek, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll actually start with a I think rather funny story when it comes to the pandemic. I remember it vividly. It was, you know, that mid-March, and things got really serious, right? And you guys can all probably, it's one of those moments where you remember where you were, probably that Sunday night when things started getting very concerning. And similar to what Santi described, our administration, and I serve both the city and a county, said, hey, let's convene a group of leaders here to figure out what we're going to do. And let's all get together in person and meet in our common area. And I said, you sure that's a good idea? I mean, this whole thing is, you know, maybe that's not the right choice. And maybe leaders should set an example and say, hey, let's do this remotely, and give permission to folks to say that's something we should do. So I called the lead administrator, talked to them, and they said, can we do that? I mean, we can actually meet remotely. And so that's where we started, right? I mean, we started with, I didn't even know that was a possibility. To not only can we do it, we've invested in the infrastructure. Let me work with the administrative folks. And of course, that Monday, then we met we were using Google at the time. We did a Google Meet, and it worked great. And everyone said, wow, I feel safer. I feel like I'm more connected. We could share documents live. And for many of those people, it was the first time they'd ever done something like that. And I know many of you are probably shaking your head like, how is that possible? But many of you are probably agreeing with me too. And that was a watershed moment, right? It was a watershed moment, both from what did it mean in terms of what can technology do for us, but what does it mean for leadership to embrace it in a way that gives permission to everybody to take advantage of the things that I think are sitting on the shelf right now in many respects, right? And that was a huge moment for us. And so what it drove home for us in terms of what we'd been doing in the years prior was making a much wider analysis of what it meant to have risk management, right? So many people narrowly think of risk management as, I don't want to get hacked, I don't want ransomware, right? It's very security focused. And similar to what we just heard from other CIOs is that we had actually made a pretty sizable investment in risk management. And when I say that, it's not just, you know, the end user experience, it's the infrastructure, it's the fiber, it's the connectivity to those places that are underserved, right? So by taking a wider view of risk management, we were able to handle that pandemic. Now we had our issues, right? But for the most part, we were not dead in the water. We were able to push people out remotely because we'd invested in that infrastructure at the basic level, not, you know, at the most, you know, end user experience, but we had the capabilities to make that work. So I always say, and it's not meant to be glib, there's nothing like a good crisis, right? I mean, it is the thing that pushes you over that edge, right? It allows me to, you know, it allows IT to take their rightful place in a leadership perspective. And that then allows us to either, hey, show off the capabilities we have, or as Santi just described, accelerate the decision-making process and implementation process to get the things in place that are already necessary. So now we're faced with, okay, we're 3 years into this, funding has come and gone, people's mindsets have shifted. Now we have to be careful not to cry wolf, right? And not be in a position where we have now said, well, everything's a crisis, right? We need to be very specific and say, okay, where are the, you know, use a scalpel here and say, okay, where does that next bit that we need to go tackle that'll help us with the unknown. And the unknown, in my opinion, is irrelevant. It's the same solution, regardless of whether it's a flood or a pandemic or a local crisis. It doesn't matter. You've got to have the basic infrastructure and the basic things to be able then to move quickly depending on what solution you need. So we're in a unique position now, I think, as IT leaders, but it's also a precarious one where very quickly, we could make some big investments that don't hit, and all of a sudden that credibility starts to get eroded. So from a research perspective, I'm really interested in, understanding, where are executives in terms of because it's kind of been an open checkbook for a few years, and that's a nice place to be when you're in IT. But what happens when that trust starts to erode in terms of, hey, we made this big play in serverless architecture, right? We're going to go big into that, and it doesn't pan out, right? Well, was that risk management or not? And so that's the challenge I think we face now. But the pandemic has opened up doors that would not have opened up otherwise.
Wait, can I add something to that, Georgia?
Sure.
Yeah, it's more of an open question than an answer, but highlighting Santi was here telling the story about the time scale that he thought that this thing was going to take 6 months, and it ended up taking a week. We did a ton of work around process at the city of Miami, lots of process maps over time. So when I hear him say that just rings like in that original map that he had of how long this would take, how much like waste it was jumping up in that process, because what he ended up with was your minimum viable process, right? So our ability to do that and realize that all these other things that are happening that are largely not really technology problems or even actual like process issues, they're really like all this people stuff that you got to kind of broker over time. And largely that's what was eliminated for us as CIOs, because they're like, we don't know what to do, technology people help us. And we got sort of carte blanche to not have to deal with a lot of the usual like bureaucracy as a technologist, that we don't have to make a case and explain some technology. We got to skip all of that stuff during this. So on one side you have that, you've got to be able to operate on that cadence, that minimum viable process. What's the quick fire thing? And then I think, speaking to what Derek's speaking about, as a CIO, you also need to be able to toggle into this longer, more risk averse view or risk aware view of all the different things that can happen. So that's sort of the challenge in this work, right? You've got to be able to move very, very quickly and adapt to that, but you also have to be able to take this long view and have a really broad look on what resilience means, a really broad look on, on what risk means, because your average person, it's a communication game. Derek is right. People are going to be thinking about like a cyber risk, because those words are usually put together. Risk encompasses this whole universe of things. So, moving forward as the technology of the future, that ability to slide in between these two cadences, I think for me it was incredibly, it was very taxing, but very, very critical to doing the work, because it requires all of it. You have to have the long view and the ability to really bring it down to what's going to happen this week.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is the pandemic did help push the adoption of technology. It sped up the procurement processes. The leadership, that's the elected as well as the CIO, we're relying on you all, the CIOs, to say, this is what we need to do, just figure out how to get it done. And you were able to get it done quickly. But how do you move forward with a risk adverse? Usually the city council, the elected officials are going to be somewhat risk adverse. You're also penny tight because you don't want to spend any extra money than you absolutely have to. But you still need to be innovative to be able to make sure that you are meeting the future needs of your cities and your communities, both internally for the processes within the organization, as well as communicating externally with the citizens, the businesses, and visitors. So how would you say, I guess it's a two-part question. What could academics research to figure out how you could do that better? And then have you had any opportunity over the last possibly year to figure out how you're going to get that balance with the innovativeness and being able to quickly turn against the systems that are not designed to be quick?
I can get a stab at that. I think one piece, maybe from like decision theory or from behavioral theory, I think generally in government it's very hard to think about what the counterfactual is. So we tend to make decisions that's partially why we tend to be so risk averse. Like things generally work, so any change risk making something not work. So even there's an opportunity cost, like where doing something better would make things better, which is having to deal with the consequences of the downside. And we don't get to usually benefit from the upside, right? It's like we make it a little bit faster. We still get our tax money. We still get the same tax levy. I don't know if anyone's going to move to Boston or to South Bend or to Pittsburgh because they are able to process like some permit in 2 days instead of 4. But I think like what the pandemic helped bring is like those choices were very clear. Is like we can't pay people if we don't accept digital signatures. Like we had been trying to work with like elected officials, with the controller, the city controller, for months. And yeah, like there's like a technical and I think that the other part is like a lot of these decisions are multifaceted. It's not only about technology. There's a regulatory, there's a legal side of things. There's a like an administrative side of things. So I think that what the pandemic showed that we can do is align all of these different kind of stakeholders to understand what is the alternative. And the alternative is like has like imminent consequences for the organization, not being able to contract, not being able to continue to do business. And what we had tried to do for years, which was to get the officials to accept electronic signatures, overnight they started taking electronic signatures. Now it goes a little bit to what we had said before. There's legwork and there's research around statutorily what were the requirements, what type of signatures, whether we were using like cryptographic envelopes like DOTComm type things, or we were just accepting like a scribble in a PDF, and what were the levels of controls that we wanted to have around for different processes. But I think that is something that it is hard. I think like focusing government is like the biggest enemy, and I think in some sense if we're able to articulate those, like what is the counterfactual to bring alignment, something that everybody cares about, and say what is the alternative of us not solving the problem. I think that that's a good engine to move new stuff.
Yeah, and I think I can build on that because it's ironic. I think the counterfactuals have been kind of exposed to a degree as a part of this pandemic, and I think it's to various degrees across different locations across the country. You did reach some sort of wall, right? We were able to do so much, and then it was, well, now we need a workaround, right? Or we're just going to accept that this is going to require a bunch of manual labor to get this piece done because we don't have the technology to do it. And so to me, the pandemic has exposed clearly the opportunities. Okay, so now the question is which opportunities to pursue, right? And so what we've done is really kind of shifted our thinking from previously it was, are the lights on? Is the network running? Is anything broken? Fine. Then IT kind of stays in the background, right? And we're more of a utility, and you're only upset when it's not working. To a partnership of we've identified these gaps, and now, as we know, the bureaucracy is the enemy, right? Because it becomes the thing that allows someone else to point somewhere else to say, well, who's leading on this, right? And if it's not me, I got other stuff to do. So can IT play a role of bringing the right people to the table? And so that's what we're doing. And I come from a business background. I am done with the word committee, right? I'm done with the word committee, and this might be a nice research project, right? What's vocabulary? How important is it when we're talking about getting things done? And I'm trying to move us to a task force mentality, right? So if you're going to come and use your time to sit and collaborate with other people, then you have a job to do. for too long, we sat and talked at each other, right? Or you came and you showed up and you got talked to and you barely listened and you weren't prepared and you left. Well, now let's actually go accomplish things on these task force. And let's not just, have an agenda and publish minutes. Come on, we can be better than that, right? And the pandemic taught us that. So if we have big challenges like application modernization or reliance on legacy systems, that's not an IT problem, actually, right? That's a business problem. I call it a business problem, but it's a procedural problem within these agencies. I'm going to bring them to the table and say, you're not coming here to listen to me tell you that we should, get off of our mainframe. You're going to have a role in describing what you're going to do to help us do that. And so that to me is a complete and total shift. And Santi mentioned stakeholders, right? Yeah, you're a stakeholder, but you have a role to play, and you got to come prepared and not just sit and be half asleep while we tell you all the problems that we can't solve. You're right. It's time to change that mindset. So that's what we're focused on. And from an academic perspective, how can we start to sell this different, right? What is the power of vocabulary? What is the power of breaking up the norms of these mandated committees that get together for reasons of mandatory reasons, but aren't doing anything, right? And just talk around the issues. And then how do we start to frame these problems so that we can solve them, not just talk about the fact that they continue to exist? You mentioned document management, right? E-signature. We've got like 6 or 8 solutions out in our enterprise right now. Well, we're going to form a document management task force, and it's going to be IT to lead that, but it's going to be the business or the different agencies participating in that to help us make decisions on where should we centralize and use our dollars best. By the way, I'm no different than Santi and no different than the CIO of Seattle or anybody else. So can academics help us tell us where we can get the biggest bang for our buck with these known challenges that we have out there? So that's my take on how do we pivot now, get stakeholders involved, and go research the things that, is it a VoIP system? Is that really the thing that's going to get us the biggest bang for our buck? Or is that, no offense, obsolete, right? And we should be thinking about other things. That's where academics can say, actually, here's where we should make our investment.
Great, thank you. Mike, do you want to add to that?
Well, I want to, a couple of things Derek was saying, has said, I think, a couple different ways already, is that the idea of kind of a passive IT department over in the corner that isn't connected to strategic decision making is going to be a problem at some point, probably sooner than later. So I think IT in this day and age certainly needs to be looked at as a strategic player and to have a seat at the table at pretty high levels of the org while decisions are being made. It's still surprising to me how that old model that some decision gets made over here and then it gets pushed off to an IT director at the end of a process to go, all right, well, we decided this thing's going to happen. Let's go do that. And I think that's gotten a lot, well, it's gotten better over the years, but there's still a lot of that. And I think there's probably a lot of research that can help support why it's important in terms of project success, which ones are more successful when IT is involved earlier in the chain. These ultimately are business problems. I think that I used to say that a lot, because of the nature of our work in terms of problem solving in IT, where we're really getting in there and examining the process and mapping things out and creating software. It's a very logical mindset that it is probably would be very valuable in a lot of these rooms early on. So positioning IT as having the kind of expertise that would be valuable in structuring things out on the front end, I think is really important. And then the other piece that I'll say about potential research is, I used to get asked a lot and probably still do. It's well, what's the right configuration for where should innovation live? Should innovation live in the mayor's office, or should innovation live in IT, or and the short answer for me is it depends on what your organization looks like. How would you map that? In my case, I had, we talked about elected officials not having sort of a bias towards innovation. I worked for a mayor who was probably overly biased for innovation and was outrunning all of us. So it depends, right? In that case, you might want to create a little bit of distance from the innovation and from that decision making, because you want to have a little bit more of like the risk considerations. So I think that sort of mapping in terms of what the composition of an organization looks like. Do you have a strong mayor? Do you have a weak mayor? What does your board look like? You know, what kind of structurally, where does strategic planning happen? I think all those things really affect how an IT department functions. I mean, I know we used to sit over, you know, happy hours after IT conferences and talk about how we're all organized and all the different things that happen to us. I think there's value there in helping future IT directors sort of sort all that out and get in the right seat at the right table early on. It's going to make everything a lot better than figuring that out the hard way over time.
Great, thank you. Guess I should disclose I'm a former elected official, and the city that I was in, we could not even take credit card payments. So you all were far ahead of us. We finally hired our first.
Can you take crypto? Could you take crypto or no?
We still can't do that yet, no. So before I get to the questions, I wanted, so you guys have touched on innovation, of how you really, to be innovative, you want to be involved. The IT department should be involved earlier in the process, the strategic planning process. One of the big things that people are talking about now, and I don't know if it's just in academia or it's out there as well, but AI. So in addition to AI, writing students' papers now, there's also, how do you see government being able to best leverage AI to meet the needs of its citizens?
Full disclosure, Georgette, I'm not even really here. This is my AI avatar that's subbing in for me because I had somewhere else to be.
Very nice.
Well, I think this is a cautionary tale, right? I mean, this is one of those things where you mentioned crypto, right, in tongue in cheek, but that's, you know, I remember producing a presentation for our board describing the blockchain, right? And man, the dead eyes that we saw, right, of like, I don't know what you're talking about. We tried to make it as accessible as possible, and we spent a lot of time on it, right? And it was one of those things where this is where placing bets is important, and where academics can help, right? Say, okay, what is the best way to implement some of these things so that we don't go waste valuable time and resources? So when I look at AI, and there is an opportunity there, but it's an opportunity that needs to be brought to us from the market. And I'm a big believer in that, right? I'm not someone who likes to go push the envelope on, I'm going to make Dodge Street in Omaha a smart street. I'm like, okay, I could invest a lot of money in doing that, right? And we could have a showcase 8 blocks, right? But what does that really solve, and how sustainable is it? And the things that have helped move the needle in terms of making our citizens' lives better are on here, right? And they've come from the private sector for the most part, and our partnerships with them are what have allowed us to bring that to bear for our citizens. So I look at AI no differently than crypto, than, you know, some of the other fads that have come and gone. AI will play a role in our ability to communicate with citizens and to work with them and to make their lives easier in terms of transactioning with government. But I'm not going to invent it. You know, I'm going to implement the solution that is scalable, is consumable, and has the right risk management profile attached to it so that I know that we can use it safely. So I don't spend a lot of time, and I saw the chat question about what keeps me up at night. That does not keep me up at night. And I will wait and see what's the best way to implement AI. And let's define AI really clearly in terms of what it means. You know, decision tree is not AI, right? And we can be better at implementing decision trees and logic into our processes as we interact with citizens. And actually, Dr. Chen, who's on the call, you know, we've worked with Dr. Chen and his colleagues on that to some degree to just parse this out. And that is not a topic that I'm all that interested in until it's at a market level where it has something that can help either us operationally, the 7,000 people that we support, this government employees, or it can help us reach citizens in a way that's meaningful and not, you know, not a flash in the pan. I'm not interested.
I would disagree a little bit with Derek, and that. So I think that I would agree in that I think that AI needs to be defined, and it's AI refers to a broad set of technologies that leverage statistical learning and big data, like large amounts of data to help come up with some decision making or some, like to model something. So there's, because it's a broad family of technologies. Some are more mature, some are better at doing some stuff, and some are less good about doing stuff. I think so. My comment would be, today, what are the things that I think that AI is particularly good? And I would also say every government and every organization on planet Earth is using AI, whether they know it or not. Your spam filter runs on AI. A lot of the advanced firewall technologies run on AI. They detect anomalies in traffic to make a determination whether something's legitimate or not. So I think what AI is not is this like magic thing that's just going to solve all of our problems. Because in some sense, if you don't know what decision you would make, you cannot model it. You cannot create like you cannot create a statistical model to decide what you're going to decide on, because, well, you don't know how you would make the decision anyway. So you can't label, you can't create that. Two, I think I would also agree with, in some sense with Derek, in the sense, partially because what makes models good is vast amount of data, is like highly dimensional models that a lot of times leveraging private sector, like you want the models to be built, like we look at chat GPT and all these things. Part of what makes chat GPT so good is that it's been trained on a ton of data, not just like 311 complaints from the residents of Boston, a ton of data, like a big chunk of the English language. So it makes it better. So I think, like, in terms of applications, there's some applications that I've seen that are good. I think computer vision is generally getting more mature. There's issues around bias, around privacy, around how it gets deployed. But like, if you unlock your phone with the camera, you're using AI for and computer vision for in a security setting. I think the second one where there's a big opportunity is processing large volumes of data. So we're starting to approach a project to try to digitize documents in the city and leveraging some of the commercial document AI tools, because document classification and extraction of metadata, and especially like now AI is better at this than like the traditional OCR, the optical character recognition. You can even like detect and transcribe like script, like things, handwritten notes. And for the city of Boston, it's a 400-year-old organization. We have birth records from like 1600. So we have to, if we want to digitize the records, some of those have never been digitized. Like they're just like hand script scribbles, and so I think that that's a good opportunity. And one that I've also seen is around infrastructure. So getting telemetry and data around things, because it's kind of equivalent, both like infrastructure and the cyber infrastructure, where we talked about the firewalls and detection of issues with like your routers, your switches, but also physical infrastructure. So in South Bend, we started using computer vision that was developed at Carnegie Mellon to detect the conditions of pavement, which helped us in capital planning. And we also use machine learning and deep learning, this convolutional neural networks, to build better models about fed with data from sensors to develop better models for our wastewater system. And that's like kind of like South Bend was famous for its smart sewers, and it's all built on AI and sensors. So anyways, it's not the panacea, it won't solve everything, but I think that there's some really good applications that can save us money in our operations. And I think that it requires a lot of context of knowing what's good and usable and what is just marketing.
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to go on a rant here, because this is like touching on topics that I have lots of ideas about, but or thoughts on. I'll agree with what I think Derek was saying, and luckily I don't have to deal with this anymore because I'm a former CIO, but the the vendor attack on blank powered by AI is significant, right? And largely a ton of noise. And I think it happened in the smart cities wave, and it's happened, there was a window of blockchain stuff that happened as well. I will say that what I have felt, this is sort of an intuitive felt about what I think is happening in AI this year is significant, partially because of the user experience layer, what we're seeing with everyday people's ability to harness these tools, because the user interfaces through the ChatGPT examples that we've seen, or through people's ability to manipulate images. And all of a sudden it's this tool that is sort of supercharging people's creativity. This idea of AI being able to supercharge an individual's ability to do something rather than this thing that sort of happens behind the scenes in a black box over there, I think that's a pretty notable shift this year, right? It has become less mysterious as a result of the user interfaces that we're seeing now than it probably was a few years back. My highlight moment for AI was not so much in hey, AI, write me a story about, me, Derek, and Santi, CIOs during a pandemic, and it giving me a script. It's actually in the inverse, me being able to feed it information, and because of its language model, it understands what I'm feeding it, and then I could ask it questions like, all right, break this down into 5 topics that mean sense. All right, now break this down into 7 topics that mean sense. And it gave me a tool to be able to manipulate the data. Why I think this is important for government and for government officials, now we're getting into the rant part. We have what I think is an really existential problem for government in the level of complexity that we have to deal with. It's already come up here a number of different times. Any tool that is helping us get a grip on that complexity and being able to give us clarity about processes, give us clarity about these huge volumes of information, give us clarity for us to be able to communicate things better. And I have seen these AI tools specifically this year do that a lot more than they've ever done. Take large volumes of information and simplify it to these kind of core concepts. We have that problem in government. Large amounts of complexity and very little ability to grapple stuff. I really think it's a pretty significant knowledge management problem that government needs to start getting really clear and explaining what it is that we do, because we're losing knowledge from administration to administration. We lose knowledge from year to year. We lose knowledge because we're moving too fast, and we don't have ability to reuse the information and the lessons that we've learned. We've got to figure out a way to anchor that knowledge down. Santi's heard pieces of my rant on this before about data standards. We talked a lot about data standards over the years, but data standards for process, ways that we can anchor knowledge down, because all of these tools that we are seeing develop are leveraging large data sets. There is no training data set for government operations. This all exists in the spaces in between, and people who know people, and what we know. It doesn't, there's no, the reason a lot of the AI that's come to cities, the reason it hasn't worked very well is because they're trying to pull from these little tiny permitting data sets and extrapolate that into the AI world. It doesn't work. So anyway, whole other topic, but I do think it is, what's happened this year is significant because of those user experiences, and government needs to get a lot better at anchoring down what it is that it does. And I think the technology departments should have a large role in that.
And if I can jump in just quickly, because Mike inspired something that, and I've heard Grace Himrell, who's the CIO of Louisville, talk about this. And it's a call to action to all of you academics. So what would be great is, to Mike's point, what if we had standardized and maybe a set of data sets that we have that allow us to evaluate algorithms, AI, for type 1, type 2 errors, around bias, around, because to Mike's point, it is very difficult for us to, these models get trained on data. And part of what we're trying to understand is how predictive they are. And no algorithm, nothing's perfect, whether it's, something that's trained on data or something that's just built on a first principles model. But it doesn't make sense to do this at one city. It makes sense to do this, I think, like in a more holistic way, where you have like a data set that allows you, that you could put past algorithm to go and see how many of those, and like it's clean and we know what the true answer is, and we can figure out what the error rates are. And you could figure out something around language, around like also identifying things in the right of way. But I think that there's a great research and collaborative opportunity between cities and universities that would make everybody's life a little bit easier and better in getting better AI for people.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I think we're all in agreement. I would just look to the ROI, right? I would look to the ROI and how can academics help us understand where we can invest in this technology to have the biggest bang for the buck. Because if I go to my street engineers and say, hey, I have an algorithm that we use weather modeling and the amount of salt they used on the road this year, and it'll tell me where your potholes are. And they'll go, I know where my potholes are. I just don't have enough money or manpower to fix it, right? So, some of this is like, look what we predicted. And you go to the people that actually do this every day and they go, well, thank you for telling me what I already knew, right? So how can we figure out how to use this in a way that helps us allocate resources? To me, that's the best. If we can move if elected officials can get something that says, hey, if we invest here, we'll have this impact, it'll be a unanimous decision to say, yeah, okay. And did an algorithmic model help us do that? And did we use a large data set across multiple cities and states that academics helped us do that? To me, that's a project that's worthy of pursuit. Telling me that when it's cloudy, I have more issues with this side or the other is mostly what I see from AI, and I'm not interested.
Great, thank you so much for that. Very vibrant discussion. Let's turn to a couple questions. One that that Derek did allude to. What are a couple things that keep you up at night as the CIO or former CIO? And what are the couple things that helped you sleep well at night? And the example was knowing that you had a really good team to address some issues. So whomever would like to start with that. Okay, you're either not sleeping well or you're sleeping fabulous.
Well, I would say I sleep a lot better than I used to. I think that comes with tenure, right? And it's probably a false sleep. But I think and I give this rant a lot, is you've got to focus on fundamentals, right? And if we have any sports fans here, right? I mean, you can practice the trick play all day, but if you don't have the basic things in place, that trick play is never going to work, right? And so, I sleep because I know we've built partnerships with folks that can help us in a pinch. I can't hire the best engineers, right? I can't hire the best network folks. But if we're working with partners that we trust and who have some sort of motivation to keep us happy and not get their name in the headlines, that's how I sleep at night. So I've got a retainer with a great cybersecurity firm, right? We work with all the best in the world, from Microsoft to Google to Oracle to everybody else. That's how I sleep at night. So for those folks that are struggling to sleep at night, well, what are your fundamentals? Don't get distracted by the shiny object. Focus on the fundamentals. And then the thing that does keep me up at night is, man, we're getting such a fractured sense of the cloud, right? And what it means and who are the big players. And, we went from, okay, I can trust a couple here, to now you have to play with all of them. And, where's the research that's allowing us to say, okay, here's the path of least resistance for folks that are overwhelmed by the number of vendors calling. The number of calls I get from elected officials who are overwhelmed by, I'm getting attacked by this vendor versus that vendor versus this vendor, all telling me that we're missing out on the future. And I have to talk them down and say, we're not missing out on the future. We've made this investment. To switch now would be a huge opportunity, a huge cost. And I don't want to have a sunk cost fallacy, but at the same time, we have to be very thoughtful. And so send them to me, and I'll help you manage those relationships. And so that's the thing that's been creeping up more and more, is very aggressive vendors who are trying to push our public officials and build in a fear-based campaign, right? Like, if you don't, you'll miss out. And so how do we manage that, right? How do we manage the growing number of vendors who claim to be cloud and helping you with any litany of things that will make your life easier, when we in the trenches know it's not a technology concern, it's a people and process concern. Will you help me with that, elected officials? Will you help us with that problem? And let's not get distracted by the shiny objects. So I don't know if it keeps me up at night. I sleep pretty good, but it is causing me more, I guess I'm thinking about more ways, and hence these task force that I mentioned before, right? So let's build a consensus building group of people that it's not just IT saying we shouldn't move from product A to product B. It's a task force of invested, I'll call them clients, but departments who are there saying, yeah, we're here, we get it, and we'll handle those concerns and we'll set the strategic direction. And I'll sleep better when those are in place.
I'll take a stab. So I made the terrible mistake of having made the decision to be a CIO in local government for the third time. So some of the same headaches, as Eric said, tenure and time to help get things organized usually brings down the stress level. So I was previously the CIO in South Bend and in Pittsburgh. So I'm at my maybe peak stress level in my time in Boston as I kind of learn what is there and what's missing. I think things that really worry me are the misalignment between IT and the business. And I think that it manifests in a couple of ways. The first one for me is solutionism. I call it solutionism. It's just almost like people that think that buying a Fitbit makes you fit. So I want to buy this thing. I have a problem. I want to buy Salesforce. And you're like, okay, how does Salesforce solve that problem? We don't know. Why would tracking that information be helpful? We don't know. Yeah, and forget even about secondary order questions where you're are the data that you're collecting regulated? Is this protected by FERPA? Is this criminal justice data? Huh? So, and being able to both, and it's not because you want to, IT is there to help drive outcomes for the other agencies and departments. We're a broker, we're an intermediary. So you don't want to not be helpful, but I think that sometimes people put themselves in a position where they're going to be a little bit in hot water. And I think about what happened to my former boss a couple of weeks ago with the FAA, Pete Buttigieg, who's now Secretary of Transportation. When the NOTAM system failed for FAA, we have so much accrued debt, technical debt, and technology is amazing. It's an amazing enabler. You couldn't think about doing, the city of Boston has 20,000 employees. You couldn't do payroll for 20,000 people every 2 weeks if it wasn't for our ERP. It'd be a mess. But that also means that if the ERP fails, we can't do payroll for 20,000 people. So, and usually people don't want to invest in some of the things that you already have. They're always thinking about what's the new thing that you want to have. So, so the alignment, this kind of big picture, how do you bring value and how do you have these a happy and healthy tension between the business and us in reducing the gap of what they need and what we're able to provide. Staff, we have an over 20%, I think it's closer to 30% vacancy rate. I'm personally doing 7 jobs. So yeah, it's but besides that, things are great. Boston's an amazing city. It's beautiful. Every time that I feel that I have a bad day, I walk around and I'm so lucky to live here, and I work for an amazing mayor. So that's the stuff that helps me fall back asleep.
Well, I'll keep it quick since I know we're pushing up on time, but I sleep much better that I'm not a CIO anymore. So that's great. And I think I already mentioned the thing that still to this day actually keeps me up, which is I do think that the complexity that currently exists across all layers of government needs to get sort of harnessed and open sourced. Going back to the open data movement 10 years ago, I think we did I think a great job by calling government people to action and saying this data might be trapped in a PDF somewhere, but it's not actually open. Let's make it machine readable and let's push it out. But we only pushed out the outputs right in the data sets. We didn't push out context for these things and about how the things work so that the public had an opportunity to sort of make sense of stuff. Transparency isn't just like pushing these things out as is. I believe that there should also be like a more concerted effort to provide some context so that the public can engage more. And, you know, even before that point, we need to get a handle on our own complexity before we keep talking about the same things over and over again and attempting to solve problems, you know, some with things that we tried like 2-3 years before. I think this is just something that continues to happen in government. Our ability to learn is being really hampered because we're not spending the time anchoring down some of this knowledge. So still doing a little bit in that area because I just think it's critical for democracy.
Well, that's a nice way to, that's a good note to end this on. I have so many more questions I would love to ask you, like legacy systems, contracting out. An hour obviously just is not enough time, but I do want to thank you for giving us 60 minutes of your time to answer some of our questions and to help us understand your world a little bit better to help guide our research, as well as hopefully give some ideas for the practitioners out there on what they're facing and ways that they can approach it. So I just want to thank you all again for spending time with us. It's been an honor to be able to hang out and ask you guys questions, and hopefully we can do it again sometime in the future.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.